So I posted a question on your Reddit page the other day about the etymology of Azeroth and its similarity to the Zeroths, but with a prefix. Before the Zeroths, etc., there is also a definition of Zeroth. Before the first, to paraphrase, has this been covered before? So I have spoken in some detail about what I like to call the higher form lore of World of Warcraft. You know, if you think of the Titans as the upper barrier to the established lore of World of Warcraft, then things like the First Ones and obviously things that come before them, that would sort of be the higher form lore in World of Warcraft, because it's lore that we can only really speculate, and even in that, it's not even speculation, it's just guesswork at that point, because we don't even know anything about the First Ones. So trying to understand anything about what came before the First Ones, you're just guessing, right? Because you don't even have a place to start from. You kind of know, we kind of have an idea of how the First Ones created the universe. This is true. We kind of know how they did that. Actually, we don't know how they did it. We do have an idea of what it cost. So we know that they sacrificed a portion of themselves in order to sort of jumpstart the Zeroth realms and to ensure that all of the cosmological forces would play their part. But outside of that, we don't really know. What's also very interesting is how the cosmological forces, and this is something that a lot of people miss, before the First Ones and before the Zeroth realms, there were cosmological forces. So all you have to do is go back to if you go to the expedition report that the brokers wrote. In the expedition report that the brokers wrote, they explained that the 6 cosmological forces were in flux. They were at war with one another, trying to conquer each other. And then the First Ones arrived, and they basically sacrificed a portion of themselves in order to bring the 6 cosmological forces into balance, to ensure that the 6 will no longer war. So this brings a whole new question of things. Is it possible that the First Ones actually sort of completely overpowered the cosmological forces, much like the Titans did with the Elemental Lords? So the Elemental Lords were on Azeroth from the first. In fact, there's arguments to be made that the Elemental Lords were here before the Old Gods even arrived, because a lot of the early lore sort of suggests that at first the Elemental Lords were perfectly happy, and then the Old Gods arrived, and the Old Gods drove the Elemental Lords mad. But then you look at the Titans, they arrive on Azeroth, and the first thing they do is they lock up all of the Elemental Lords inside their own planes, so that the Elemental Lords can no longer really exercise their power. Which, if you think about it, you know, that could be what the First Ones did to the cosmological forces of Azeroth. They simply just locked them up. My theory is vague, but somewhat revolves around Azeroth predating all beings we've ever heard of, and the First Ones harnessed it to create the pattern. Again, I would say I'm very much willing to entertain that theory. I would actually be very willing to entertain that theory. So I have 2 thoughts on what Azeroth is, and it's 2 divergent theories. So the 2 theories are completely mutually exclusive. They cannot exist in the same space. But the one is that Azeroth does not actually form part of the whole of the cycle. So if you take the cycle to be all of the elemental forces, all of the cosmological forces, all of the First Ones and the Zeroth realms and the Great Beyond, and you take all of that and you call it a cycle, so everything as it operates within it, that is the cycle, then Azeroth is outside of this cycle. Azeroth does not exist within the cycle. Azeroth was kind of placed inside the cycle by a force that is outside of the cycle. And this goes back to the arguments of, again, the brokers in the expedition report, where they explain that in the beginning there were 2 forces. One of these forces eventually became the cycle, as I explained it. The other, they don't know what happened to the other. The other is just sort of gone. So my argument, my theory, at least in this sense, would be that Azeroth is a creation of this other force, not actually a creation of this force. And this is why beings like Zuval can use Azeroth's essence to effectively dominate the entire universe, because Azeroth is so much more powerful than anything else. The other is that Azeroth was the original force from which all other forces flowed. So you could very easily say that the brokers, insofar as the knowledge that they were able to discern from the First One temples, because remember, the First Ones were the first ones to create our galaxy, but nowhere is it said that they were the first beings to exist. It's very possible that other beings may have existed either before them or while they were alive, whatever the case might be, but it is possible. It could be that before even the first ones, Azeroth was a force within the universe, and, you know, whatever could be extrapolated from there and how that would play into the universe, I'm not entirely sure, but I would be willing to entertain the theory. And Acheron just saw a Balila video which he tells that maybe Nosdormu had his eyes opened by the old gods and saw that what the Titans really want isn't good for us. I mean, that would just align with my own theories. So my thoughts around Nosdormu would kind of be twofold. On the one hand, I can absolutely see how Nosdormu, at the end of his life, so when all of it plays out, because the current thing is that Nosdormu dies, or at the moment of Nosdormu's death, he becomes Morozond. To this, my argument would be that in the moment of his death, so at the hour of his death, in the seconds before his death, Nosdormu sees something. Something is revealed to him in whatever sense that might be, but this revelation shows him the absolute manipulation of the Titans, the subversion of the Titans, and in that moment, Morozond is born, because now Nosdormu realizes that there is no point in sacrificing himself here, because if he sacrifices himself, if he dies here, then humanity and mortals and dragonkind keeps existing within this subverted universe that the Titans have created, and therefore he becomes Morozond in order to stop whatever the Titans were trying to do. And it's sort of telling that he wants to destroy all of the dragon aspects. That is point number one. And point number two is that he wants to destroy all of the different timelines, and so that there is only one timeline left. It's funny enough that the Primalists want the same thing. The Primalists also wish to bring an end to all of the dragon aspects and also all of the Titan creations. So that is entirely possible. The other, of course, is that he has already seen the subversion of the Titans, and that he's seen it because of the Void, and because the Void has control over a lot of the timeline stuff. That's how the Void got their entrance. So there is those two theories that could be possible. I'm not entirely sure which one to believe, but I have made a video not long ago, actually, I think like a month and a half ago or something, where I said basically the same things. How could they not be the first beings to exist? That's not possible. It's literally in their name. We already know they weren't the first things to exist, King Julian, because we know that there is a clockmaker of the universe. There is something that created things before them. The first ones may have just called themselves the first ones, much like the Titans said that they created everything on Azeroth, but really they only ordered a lot of things on Azeroth. They created jack shit. You know, so yeah, a name is just a name. Doesn't mean anything. Wait, are you saying that current Nosdormu could be Morozond already? Because no. As far as Nosdormu is concerned, it is impossible for him to change the timeline of Morozond. He cannot subvert it, because no matter which timeline he goes to, Morozond is always created. The sad thing is, the prophecy as it stands, what he saw, is that if he tries to stop his death by any means, he becomes Morozond, and he will die. There is a moment that death will come for him. But if he tries to subvert it in any way, if he tries to change the outcome in any way, he becomes Morozond as a result of this. So we have to start asking ourselves, what could possibly be the events of that would lead to an outcome of Morozond every single time, no matter what. The Book of the Broken make clear that the outside force is outside of the cosmic forces, or could it meant the first ones? No, it's definitely not the first one, so we can go... The nature of the 7 possible infinite. Among the superstitions conveyed to me by Iraq II, superstitions I of course dismissed as the fanciful mythos of an uncivilized culture, one lingered within my mind. For you see, it takes a truly exceptional intellect to transcend what one is taught and retaught by so-called scholars, open to only a narrow possibility. Iraq II spoke of 1,000 truths, which I at first took as a sign of scattered indecision. But the key to interpreting the writings of the First Ones lay in setting aside what I had believed and accepting a greater reality beyond it. Suddenly I perceived the pattern and its fractals not as one truth, but layers of intersecting truths. Just as we, from our first moment of consciousness, know that death is the foundation of all existence, so there are beings whose nature is fundamentally different from our own. Imagine then, based upon the truths I have told you, that each of these rival forces could, and I stress could, for the fractals may yet reveal another path, be embodied by a host of transcendent beings as powerful as our own eternal ones. I have but scratched the barest surface. There are references to forces of Primal that we have no frame of reference for them, rolling and shining, measured and deliberate. The words here have multiple meanings. I must set them aside for now. What is clear is that great powers took shape. How many? There are numbers within numbers, my friends. At first I thought only 2, until I perceived an infinite array. Oh, the terror of it. But as of late, I have settled on 6, possibly 7, but the last might be an artifact of the geometry, a fractal. I will tell you what I know. These 6 forces existed in strife. Well, not strife in the way one such as you or I would see it. Opposition, surely, but whether malignant or benign is unclear. There was imbalance, until there was a need for something more. They came together, or were brought together, depending on how one interprets the fractal, and gave form to their designs. Forged, scribed, shaped. The exact word is elusive. Each architect gave a portion of themselves, and thus the pattern was drawn. It is from here that language becomes clearer. Okay, so at some point here they do say it. Okay, here it is. 6 realms, many intersections, countless fractals. This is page 6. Imbalance, possibly, but that might be wrong. If 6 equal 1, then what is the other? The one outside the pattern. To answer your question. So, according to at least the language of the First Ones, there is 6 forces. The 6 forces actually equal just one force. So there's one force. The other one is outside of that. As far as I'm concerned, it's pretty set in stone. There is 2 forces. The one that we know of that created, quote-unquote, our universe. So this would be this entire universe. So if you look at the cosmological map, this is actually just one force. If you were to zoom out of this, this is the one force, right? And in this you have, the light, life, order, void, death, and chaos, and you have Azeroth right here in the middle. And then you have the 6 elements, of which spirit, of course, is kind of gone. We don't know where, but you have the 6 elements. This is one force. This is one. And if you zoom out, so right now you're looking at this force. This is the force that you're looking at, right? But if you were to zoom out, you would actually see that there is another force in this universe. What that other force is, we don't know. But there is another force in this universe. We don't know how this one might be made up. Is it made up the same as ours? Does it look inherently different? Is it possible that this force has none of this? So in other words, if we were to say this force doesn't look like this at all, instead this force exists, it doesn't have all of the fractals within it, but this force may have created this, right? So that's entirely possible. So this force just infiltrated this force. Or, and this is where my theory really becomes, I think, personally, kind of cool. What if the beginning of the universe looked something like this? So if we were to remove all of this very quickly. Okay, so what if the beginning of the universe looked something like this? We had 2 forces. Okay? 2 forces. We'll call this light and dark just for interest's sake, because I do think that ultimately it comes down to light and dark. Actually, let's do this instead. We'll call it 1 and 2, right? So force 1 and force 2. Force 2, instead of fracturing itself, it decides to create within itself a singular being, a being that possesses all of the power of the entirety of the universe. And so, Azeroth is born. The other force that is now sort of looking at this, going, what the fuck? How dare you create a being of this power? What are you trying to achieve? This force instead decide, no, I will encompass you and I will subvert you. How will I do this? Well, I will fracture myself into 6 forces. So instead of creating one being of unimaginable power, I will become 6 beings of unimaginable power. And with these 6 beings, I will exercise pressure upon you. I will subvert you using your own power to create my own life. And here's where things get truly interesting. Azeroth seems to be capable of creating life on a massive scale through the thing we call the Emerald Dream. So if we were to say this is the Emerald Dream, it is connected to Azeroth as the map shows us. So we have the Emerald Dream here, right? We have the Emerald Dream. Azeroth can create life in its purest form. No need for constructs, no need for creations. It just creates life in and of itself. This other force, this one over here, doesn't have that ability. It cannot create life. It can create constructs. This is why when you go to the realms of death, what do we find? We find eternal ones, right? We find eternal ones. But these eternal ones don't live. Not really. They're not alive. They're constructs. They're constructs created with the essence of Azeroth. So as these 6 cosmological forces draw strength from Azeroth, draw Azeroth's anima, they can create life within their constructs. They can't create true life, but they can create life within their constructs. Now, here's where things get spooky. We have all just believed that the void is where the old gods come from. So we'll draw a couple of tentacles. I am a void lord, a void master, right? I'm a servant of the void. But the old gods can create life too. Actual life. It's thanks to their curse of flesh that life is established through the constructs. So could it be that the old gods are not, as it were, the creatures of the void, but rather the creatures of Azeroth? So they are protectors of Azeroth. And this is what the Titans are trying to hide from us. Remember, if you have a force of life, it doesn't necessarily have to be that that force is life. Think of death. What does the forces of death do? The forces of Zereth Mortis, what do? Did they create death? No. How do we know they didn't create death? Well, rather simple. If you look at the natural flow of anima. So here we have the cosmological forces. This is our cosmos. Okay, so we'll just call it Cosm. This is our cosmos. And then you have the Shadowlands is the rest of this place. So from the cosmos, we have this flow of anima, right? It runs like this. Here we have the Maw. The souls flow into the Maw, into the river. What's the river called again? Gargua. I think the Gargua River. I could be wrong. It may have another name. But it runs into this river, and then at the end of this river, it runs into the Tower of Torghast. So we have a nice little tower there, right? Tower of Torghast. Everyone's unhappy, whatever the case may be, right? But this is the Tower of Torghast. It runs into the Tower of Torghast. There seems to be the natural flow of souls in the universe. From the cosmos, into the Maw, into the tower. Now, we could say that the tower is actually unnatural. The natural soul of the Shadowlands should look something like this, actually. From here, so from where the Maw is, the natural flow of these souls are actually, so as they run through this river, here it will break up and it will flow naturally to different afterlives. You'll have all manner of different afterlives, and this river will feed all of these afterlives equally. The jailer, being one of the constructs of the first ones, not life, but a construct, decides to build a giant tower right in the middle of this. Says, fuck that. This is my home. I'll do whatever the fuck I want, and I'll kill all of these flows. I will take all of these souls for myself. Okay? I will coalesce them within this tower so that I can build a universe for myself. But before that, the first ones and their constructs have an even better idea. They say, why allow for these souls to flow into the maw, why don't we build a tower right here? We'll call this tower Oribos. This tower stops the natural flow to the maw of where souls should naturally go, and instead it captures all of these souls, pulling it up towards the Arbiter that sits here and sort of overlooks all the bad shit that happens. And from here, we will create 4 afterlives. We will order death. So we don't create death. We simply order it. So from here, the Arbiter decides which one of these afterlives get which souls. And the natural flow of souls to the maw is corrupted. There is no natural flow anymore because the flow runs into Oribos. How do we know this? The second the Arbiter goes down, the souls continue their flow to the maw, as it has always done, and into Torghast, because Torghast was built for this purpose and this purpose alone, to capture those souls and turn it into an army. So when you say that I'm excluding life, or sort of underdefining or undefining life, the death aspects as we know them right now do not create death. They didn't create anything with death. Death was a natural starting place of the universe. Anything that lives must eventually die. What they did is they brought order to it, the same as the Titans did on Azeroth. So it is possible that when you have the forces of life over here on the map, these forces of life do not create life, but rather they order and sort of give life purpose in their own ideological sense. So whatever they think life should be, the only true life comes from this little circle here. This is the only place that true life exists, is in this. And all of it's been subverted, in a sense. That would be my theory.